and I'm asking Stallone to be in my movie, so he called the producers. I made a mistake, I guess, but he didn't talk to me. What did Jean-Claude Van Damme really do to Sylvester Stallone? And why is Stallone speaking out about it now, after staying silent for decades? In this video, we break down the shocking truth behind a moment that Stallone has finally decided to address. A moment that isn't part of any movie, but left a lasting mark. Sylvester Stallone breaks silence and reveals what Jean-Claude Van Damme did to him. And it's not good. This isn't about Hollywood drama. It's about a personal boundary crossed and a quiet fallout no one saw coming. Stay with us, because this changes everything you thought you knew. The rise of two legends in the thick smoke of 1980s Hollywood. Two names began shaping the definition of action: Sylvester Stallone and Jean-Claude Van Damme. Stallone was already entrenched in American pop culture, not as an actor, but as a symbol. Rocky Balboa had transformed him from a struggling screenwriter into a cultural monolith. By the time First Blood hit theaters in 1982, Stallone wasn't riding a wave, he was the wave. Every studio wanted more muscle, more grit, and more explosions. Stallone delivered on all fronts. His films weren't simply box office hits, they were patriotic events. While other actors tried to find their footing, Stallone was printing gold. He wasn't concerned with who was up and coming. He lived at the top of the mountain. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in Belgium, a young man with a gymnast precision and a body sculpted by relentless discipline was staring at movie posters and dreaming of his own name being up there. Jean-Claude Van Damme trained like he was already famous. Martial arts wasn't just his passion, it was his escape. He studied Bruce Lee's every movement. He obsessed over body mechanics and form. And when that wasn't enough, he boarded a plane to the United States with a duffel bag full of dreams and a wallet nearly empty. What happened next could have only unfolded in Los Angeles. Van Damme started by handing out headshots at restaurants. He worked as a limo driver, a carpet cleaner, even a pizza delivery guy. He slept on friends' couches. Every day, he walked into studios uninvited, reciting his now famous line, "I'm going to be a movie star, you'll see." At the time, most people rolled their eyes. They had heard it all before, but Van Damme kept showing up. He didn't fade. He got louder, more confident, and eventually someone said yes. His breakout came with Bloodsport in 1988. The movie wasn't expected to succeed. It had a small budget and even smaller expectations. But audiences responded to Van Damme's speed, his flexibility, and that now iconic spinning kick. The film turned him into a recognizable face overnight. From there, the floodgates opened. Kickboxer, Lionheart, double impact. Van Damme had arrived. And he wasn't slowing down. But while fans compared him to Chuck Norris or Steven Seagal, Van Damme's eyes were on Stallone. He saw in him the final benchmark of success. Stallone wasn't a martial artist, but he had the career Van Damme wanted. Global box office domination, name recognition, a place in the pantheon of stars. In interviews, Van Damme spoke with admiration about Stallone. He watched every film. He studied how Stallone carried himself. He even mimicked the way he talked in press junkets. To some, it looked like hero worship. To others, it was strategy. Stallone, for his part, had taken note. Van Damme was everywhere, and audiences loved him. But Hollywood is small, and word gets around fast. Some agents began whispering stories about how eager Van Damme was to meet Stallone, about how persistent he had become, how he was showing up at events he wasn't invited to, how he seemed to be working his way into Stallone's circles by any means necessary. At first, it was harmless. Stallone had seen dozens of young guys chase the spotlight. But Van Damme wasn't like the others. He wasn't waiting in line. He was skipping it. It wasn't long before an incident occurred that turned the admiration into something heavier, something unresolved, something Stallone wouldn't talk about for years. Not publicly, Not until now. Van Damme's unusual road to fame. Los Angeles was built on ambition, but Jean-Claude Van Damme's brand of ambition made people pause. It wasn't polite. It wasn't subtle. It was loud, persistent, and often personal. He didn't care who said no. He kept talking until someone said yes. His accent was thick, his charm was unpredictable, but his determination was impossible to ignore. People in the industry started to notice him not because of his resume, but because he wouldn't stop knocking on doors. Literally. He'd show up at producers' offices with no appointment. He'd approach celebrities in restaurants. He was once spotted sprinting through a studio parking lot to catch up with a casting agent getting into her car. He begged her to watch him kick. Right there in the middle of the lot, he dropped into a split between two cars and smiled like it was completely normal. This was how he operated. His moves were equal parts hustle and desperation. Most people brushed him off. Some were amused. A few felt uneasy. But Van Damme had one goal, and he wasn't going to get there by waiting quietly in the wings. There were rumors about the way he inserted himself into industry circles. One story claimed he snuck onto a studio back lot disguised as a delivery driver, only to end up shadowboxing in front of a stunt coordinator. Another said he once entered a gym Stallone frequented, not to work out, but to accidentally bump into the man. Whether true or not, the stories grew with each retelling, but the most persistent whispers involved his growing obsession with Stallone. Some insiders began to describe it as more than admiration. They said Van Damme was tracking where Stallone would be, that he was seen lingering outside events Stallone attended, that he was working connections to get closer to him in ways that felt less like networking and more like strategy. Still, Van Damme's star continued to rise. Bloodsport made him bankable. Kickboxer made him a franchise name. Double Impact showed studios he could carry more than one role. Yet even as the scripts came in and the paychecks got bigger, he didn't seem satisfied. He wasn't chasing money. He was chasing stature. And for Van Damme, that meant being accepted by the very people who once ignored him. Stallone remained at the top of that list. There was one key event that marked a shift. It was a high-profile Hollywood party hosted at Stallone's mansion. Many attendees were established stars. A few were rising names. Van Damme was not invited, but showed up anyway. The guards at the gate didn't recognize him immediately. Maybe he flashed a confident smile. Maybe he said something convincing. But somehow he got in. According to people who were there, Van Damme didn't sneak through a back window or creep in through the hedges. He walked through the front like he belonged. Inside, he mingled with producers, posed for photos, even cornered a few directors to pitch himself. Most assumed he was someone's guest. Stallone didn't notice him right away. But when he did, there was a moment, a long stare, an awkward beat. Stallone reportedly nodded and moved on. Nothing was said that night, but something hung in the air. Van Damme had crossed into a space that wasn't meant for him. And even if nobody spoke it aloud, everyone could feel it. What happened afterward is murky. Some say Stallone let it slide. Others say he didn't. Whatever the truth, that night planted a seed. Not for a collaboration, not for friendship, but for a slow burn of tension that would smolder quietly behind the scenes. Until one day, Stallone decided he had something to get off his chest. Behind closed doors, what no one knew. For years, the story of Jean-Claude Van Damme's visit to Sylvester Stallone's house floated through Hollywood like a punchline. It was one of those tales people repeated at dinner parties, half believing it, half not. But behind the laughter, behind the surface charm, there was something else. Something that didn't sit right with those who were actually there that night. The party was supposed to be a casual gathering, not too big, not too loud. Stallone, known for hosting private get-togethers with hand-picked guests, had invited a close circle of producers, actors, and old friends. His wife at the time, Brigitte Nielsen, had helped arrange the evening. She had become a public figure in her own right. And although she often played it cool around the Hollywood crowd, she was known to be fiercely protective of her space. Sometime after the sun dipped and the champagne started flowing, Van Damme appeared. He wasn't on the list. He wasn't expected. Some claimed he arrived with another guest. Others believed he walked up the driveway alone and talked his way past whoever was working security. The exact details remain unclear, but what's certain is this: he made it inside. The mood reportedly shifted the moment he entered. Not dramatically, not like a record-scratch moment in a movie, but subtly. People noticed. He greeted strangers like old friends. He complimented the furniture, the art, even Stallone's dog. Then he began seeking out Sly himself. It didn't take long. Stallone was near the pool, speaking with the director. Van Damme approached with a wide smile, extended his hand, and delivered a line he'd been rehearsing in his head for years. I finally made it. Stallone, caught off guard, shook his hand. But according to one witness, his expression froze. Nielsen, standing nearby, didn't say a word. She looked at Van Damme, then looked at her husband. It was a cold stare. And from that moment forward, the atmosphere turned tight. What Van Damme didn't know, or didn't care to notice, was that Stallone didn't find this flattering. He found it intrusive. According to a longtime friend of Stallone's, the actor had already heard about Van Damme's stunts around town. The gym drop-ins, the studio ambushes, the rehearsed compliments at red carpets. This wasn't the first time he'd crossed paths with Van Damme, but it was the first time he'd felt cornered. Later that evening, as the party began to thin out, Stallone reportedly asked a friend, "Who the hell told him he could be here?" The question was rhetorical. The frustration was not. There were whispers afterward. Nothing public, nothing confirmed. Some said Van Damme had followed Brigitte Nielsen around the house, talking too much, standing too close. Others said he had wandered into private areas, mistaking boldness for charm. None of this ever made it into tabloids. It stayed in the margins. But the impression had been made, and it wasn't a good one. Van Damme eventually left, unaware of the damage he had done, or maybe unwilling to acknowledge it. To him, it was another step toward visibility. To Stallone, it was something else entirely. Over the years, the story was softened. Stallone would mention it with a smirk in interviews. "He showed up at my house," he'd say, laughing. Audiences assumed it was harmless. A quirky anecdote about two action stars crossing paths. But no one ever asked what happened when the cameras weren't rolling. No one asked how Stallone actually felt about it. Not until recently, when, decades later, the smirk disappeared, and Stallone, visibly agitated, finally said what had been on his mind all along. Stallone breaks silence. For years, Sylvester Stallone kept the story under wraps. The Van Damme incident was always played off as a light-hearted memory, told with a chuckle, trimmed down for late-night interviews. Most people thought it was just another Hollywood oddity, a young, cocky martial artist showing up uninvited, trying to impress the king of the genre. It made for a good story, until Stallone finally stopped laughing. In a recent interview, filmed quietly, released without fanfare, Stallone decided he had stayed silent long enough. And what he revealed wasn't some forgotten party tale. It was a memory still laced with irritation, one that clearly never sat right with him. Jean-Claude was not respectful, Stallone said, tightening his jaw. He was not a guest. He was not invited. He was not someone I trusted to be in that space. The interviewer didn't interrupt. There was no script here. Stallone wasn't performing. He was remembering. And what he remembered had nothing to do with admiration or mentorship. He described the night in clear terms. Van Damme had entered his home without warning, slipped past security, and moved through the house like he owned it. He approached guests he didn't know. He hovered too long near Stallone's wife. He ignored body language, avoided subtle hints, and kept pitching himself like the room owed him a career. Stallone had brushed it off publicly for decades. But sitting there now, older and sharper than ever, he made it clear. That night wasn't about ambition, he said. It was about ego. He wanted to prove he could get in. And he did. But I never forgot it. For the first time, Sylvester Stallone broke silence and revealed what Jean-Claude Van Damme did to him. And it's not good. It wasn't just an intrusion. It was personal. What bothered him most wasn't the arrival. It was the disregard. The way Van Damme walked past boundaries, social cues, private spaces, as if no one else in the room mattered. It wasn't confidence, Stallone continued. It was disrespect, plain and simple. My wife saw it, my friends saw it. Hell, I saw it. But at the time, I didn't want headlines. I didn't want drama. He admitted he kept his distance afterward. That every time Van Damme's name came up for a project, he passed. Not because of competition, because of principle. When asked why he eventually cast Van Damme in The Expendables 2, Stallone didn't hesitate. Because the role needed someone cold, someone who could stare you down without blinking. I knew he had that in him. They worked together. They fought on screen. But there was no reunion, no forgiveness, no buried hatchet. Stallone said they spoke only when necessary, and the set stayed quiet between takes. He didn't end the interview with bitterness. He didn't throw insults, but he did offer one closing thought quietly. There are people you work with, and people you respect. Sometimes they're not the same. And just like that, the legend of Van Damme's boldest Hollywood move lost its glow. The silence was over, and the truth was colder than anyone expected. The fallout we never saw. When Stallone finally spoke about what happened with Van Damme, it didn't make a splash. There were no urgent headlines, no trending hashtags. It came and went, quietly. The interview aired on a smaller platform, one of those long-form sit-downs where actors reflect more than promote. Most of the world missed it. But the people who needed to hear it, those who had been around, who remembered the night in question, they caught it. Some were surprised Stallone said anything at all. He was never one to air grievances. He built his career on strength, grit, and silence. But something in his expression made it clear. This had been sitting with him for too long. Those who had worked with him over the years could recall subtle signs. A moment on set when Van Damme's name came up and Stallone's face hardened. A meeting where Van Damme was suggested for a role, and the conversation shifted. None of it ever looked like a feud. But it wasn't warm either. There was a wall, and now people understood why it was there. Inside the industry, the story filled in a blank. Not a scandal, but an answer to a question that had lingered for years. Why had Stallone never collaborated with Van Damme during their peak? Why hadn't they stood side by side when every other action hero seemed to cross over into each other's worlds? The silence made sense now. It had never been about competition. It had been personal. Back on the set of The Expendables 2, some crew members remembered that tension. The scenes were rehearsed without much talking. Van Damme kept to his trailer. Stallone stuck with the core team. They shook hands when needed. They posed for press photos. But there was no connection beyond the job. People assumed it was professionalism. In hindsight, it was something else. Distance that had been there from the start. Van Damme never responded. No interview. No quote. Those close to him said he had no intention of revisiting the past. Some even said he didn't remember that night the way Stallone did. To Van Damme, it might have been another ambitious move. One of many. But for Stallone, it wasn't just another night. It had changed the way he saw him. And nothing that followed ever really undid that. Friends of Stallone say he didn't bring it up again after the interview. He hadn't planned to. It came out in the moment, like a window opening for a second and then closing. He said what he needed to say and moved on. There was no fallout in the traditional sense, no press storm, no calls from agents. But the people who had been in those rooms, the ones who had always heard the story as a joke, now carried a different version of it in their minds. One that felt quieter, more honest, and a little heavier. Van Damme's fans still love his films. Stallone's legacy remains untouched, but between them, something was always unsettled. Something that wasn't loud, wasn't public, and never really healed. And maybe that's all it ever was meant to be. A line crossed, a moment remembered, a friendship that never happened, a door that never opened again. Years have passed since that night. The house has changed. The people have changed. The moment itself has faded from public memory. But for Sylvester Stallone, certain memories don't get filed away. They just sit, unspoken, untouched, but always there. He didn't bring up Van Damme again. Not in interviews, not in memoirs. He let that one conversation speak for itself. The words had hung in the air long enough. Repeating them would have cheapened them. Van Damme, for his part, remained quiet. Whether out of pride, restraint, or indifference, he never corrected Stallone's account. He didn't deny it. He didn't defend it. Maybe he figured the moment had already happened, and there was nothing worth reopening. Maybe he remembered it differently. Or maybe, deep down, he knew Stallone had always seen him as a guest who had overstayed his welcome. The strangest part is that both men continued on paths that sometimes ran parallel, but never touched again. After The Expendables 2, there was no sequel reunion, no spin-off, no surprise cameo. Stallone continued building legacy projects. Van Damme shifted into smaller, more self-aware roles, films where he played versions of himself, sometimes washed up, sometimes wise, always trying to reframe how the world saw him. But the one thing he never did was reframe how Stallone saw him. Behind the scenes, people still wondered if something else had happened that night. Something Stallone didn't say. Something Van Damme forgot, or pretended to. There had always been vague talk about an uncomfortable interaction with Brigitte Nielsen, about private rooms being accessed, about behavior that crossed more than one line. But those details were never confirmed. Stallone didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The disappointment in his voice said enough. The story now fully told isn't a scandal. It's not even explosive. It's something quieter, sadder. Two action legends who could have shared a moment in history never did. Fans often imagined a Stallone-Van Damme team-up in the 90s. Maybe a buddy cop film. Maybe a soldier versus assassin flick. Something iconic. The posters were dreamed up in dorm rooms, drawn by kids who worshipped biceps and slow-motion showdowns. But behind those fantasies was a reality neither actor ever really spoke about. They didn't get along, not because of rivalry, because of a line that was crossed early and never uncrossed. Some say Stallone was too harsh. Others say Van Damme was too bold. But both of them, in their own ways, were products of their time. The 80s action era was built on ego and myth. Everyone wanted to be the biggest, the loudest, the most unforgettable. There wasn't much space for apologies. Today, they live on different sides of the legacy spectrum. Stallone is still carving statues into the mountain. Van Damme is more of a cult figure now, still loved, still admired, but from a distance. He walks through airports without much fuss. He takes photos with fans. He cracks jokes about his splits. But one door never reopened. The one he walked through without permission. And maybe that's what this whole story was always about. Not a feud, not a betrayal, but a moment when someone stepped too far into someone else's life, thinking it would be remembered as ambition, when in truth, it landed as something else entirely. Respect, once lost, doesn't always return. And in that quiet space between two legends, there was never another word, never another handshake, only silence, and the door that stayed shut. If Van Damme had never walked through that door, would these two action giants have built something unforgettable together? Or was this clash always inevitable?